this is the kind of been like a living document for a while. We started with the first class of, and there's some things in here like some tips and tricks and things like that. But really, and this has grown a little bit just because like our knowledge and my knowledge too has grown, and some specifics we've added, but they're not limited to just these things. And again, these are like in real no particular order about like food substitutes and things to avoid and things like that. And let's see, make sure that's the right one. Okay, yeah. So some of this isn't just food substitutes. I mean, some of these things are things to avoid, and some of these things are like when you're at boot camp. Clearly, a lot of these things you can't institute in boot camp. These are more for the things when you go onto selection and you have the weekends on your own, and you can bring some things into your barracks, right? Not necessarily open food containers and things like that, but we'll just kind of go through this. I think some of the things we want to avoid, big picture things I think are worth avoiding if we can. And again, if you're not cooking your own food, some of the things like certain oils we want to avoid, honestly. Now, seed oils, vegetable oil, things like that. We've kind of heard all that stuff. We want to avoid. Now, if you're not cooking your food at Bud's Prep and things like that, clearly you're going to have to eat what's in the steam tables. Now, the really cool thing in my experience about Bud's, and I don't think it's changed much, and I know this is the case with your Army, Air Force side too, is there's always multiple options. There's always a bunch of food options. So it's like if they're having fish that day, they typically have chicken as well. Or if like, hey, they have egg noodles, but they typically always have rice and other things too, and there's always fresh fruit. So I think, what do I have here is like, you're going to try to consistently choose better choices. That's really what you're looking at. Like if you have food choices, ask yourself like, which one is probably a better option? And in some cases, you're like, it might. If you're in Hell Week and things like that, and you got food in front of you, and you're like, well, that's not super appetizing. That is, and I'm going to eat that. That actually might even be a better option sometimes. Eating something like egg noodles don't sound good, but that pizza, I'm going to probably eat that. And given those conditions, like maybe that's where you got to kind of decide. And in the selection side, it's not a perfect thing, but knowing that there's options and having a plan going in, it's more about the weekends and times you have off. I think trying to avoid pastas that are processed, trying to avoid breads that are processed, excess sugar. I mean, sugar in excess is a big problem, right? And that's not, we're talking about like table sugars and sodas and things like that. I'm not talking fruit. When you're at selection and you go into the cafeteria or galley or DFAC, whatever we're calling it, bananas, apples, oranges in abundance are a good idea for not just a carbohydrate source, a sugar source, but also a good fiber source, vitamin source, and things like that. So it's selection, and especially at your age right now, I wouldn't limit yourself on fruit intake unless you have an aversion to it, right? Some people, like for me in selection, I always really depend on bananas. I always seem to be able to stomach bananas in selection. And so that for a long time, bananas were a go-to for me. I never seemed to throw them up. And even today, berries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, I eat in pretty high abundance, even in the frozen ones, for a few reasons. But good options in carbohydrate, last thing is like rice and potatoes, especially at selection, really cannot go wrong with.
These kinds of things too, like when you're overtraining or you're undersleeping, a lot of times your appetite goes out the window too. So it's really important that you guys are doing your best to eat enough during these selection processes. So like Jeff is mentioning, if a sandwich looks good that day, do that. Don't avoid that just because somebody's not in the same way that you guys eat, or does the same thing you guys eat. But I agree with having a lot of fruit, especially when you guys are going through that selection process, also for your recovery. That will certainly help. At times when you don't have your appetite, you should try to eat something anyways, in the very least, just so that you don't get sick. We have a lot of guys or injured, we have a lot of guys that will call us back because of loss of appetite. Their sleep goes out the window too if you're not eating properly, and then it's really hard to recover. So all these things, or when you're in that process, they know that you're going to not be sleeping. They know that you are going to be overtraining. So you guys have to take control of the things that you can, one of them being your nutrition. Even if it doesn't feel good sometimes, really try to make some choices that might be, fruit is usually really easy on your stomach too, right? So making choices that you're not super hungry, but this might be something I can just take down right now and just use for fuel when we have something coming up as far as a test.
Yeah, she already kind of mentioned like sandwiches and breads. Like that's where like making healthier choices is gonna really extend itself. Like sourdough bread, a good sourdough bread, not like, you know, there are not all sourdough breads are made equal. Like Sprouts in California has an entire section of different sourdoughs. Now sprouted frozen breads too, like the Ezekiel stuff. It really I don't eat bread at all unless it's a specific sourdough. But the sprouted stuff, this morning I had a sprouted Ezekiel English muffin, and I tolerate it really well, and it doesn't mess up my blood sugar. So, and I like it. I like that crunchier, heartier bread anyway. So that's like kind of one of the cool things when you go to a place, if you're in Buds, where you have a lot more food choices as you would compared to like Fort Bragg or something like that, or Fort Benning. And that's not a knock on the place, it's just how the demographic is. But you can find good food choices, and I think that's find the things that she's right, it's satiating. That because when you go to a high stress environment, one of the first two common things we hear is, I can't sleep and I've lost my appetite. They're pretty much inseparable, and usually when your appetite comes back up because you've adjusted to the high stress, your food is going in, sleep is very quickly to come about after that. And so don't, like I say to people, expect that you're going to get loss of sleep or loss of appetite when you show up for the right reasons. You guys give a damn, you showed up, you're sincere about your training, like, oh, this is important, we're here. Yeah, that heightened sense of stress is usually kind of like, okay, gotta get past that. Okay, got it. Snap out of it. Go get some food. Do some things to re-regulate that sort of idea. Okay, like I said, San Diego is awesome. Has tons of healthy food options. Sprouts in Coronado, the complete other end of the island. There's like a natural food grocery store right there on the island. Now you pay a little bit more for it, but I always like, I've got no other expenses at Buds. So if I'm spending just an extra $100 on food for this, that, and snacks, like that's money well spent. And that was at least my disposition. I wasn't spending on alcohol and candy. I was spending on food. So things I have in here, which are really, really common. And again, I didn't grow a taste for sushi until I was 24. I didn't like it, the idea of it. I was unsure about it. The sushi, curry vegetables, right? Thai food, Cambodian, Vietnamese food. We already talked about the pho, right? You can get fatty tunas and fatty salmons like escalar at a sushi place. Like escalar is fatty tuna. Again, we're getting those omegas that we want, those omega-6s we really want, because you're not going to be able to take your Thorne Super EPA with you at selection, understandably, right? But that's the food substitute, is your avocados and things like that are those good fats.
I would also include, like, on this topic too, if you guys don't really have a big appetite, or you're trying to find something to eat that's quick, if you find like a broth-based soup, or like sometimes when you go to those grocery stores and they have the soup is already hot for you, or you can take a container of their soup home, that's a really, really good way to get some of that collagen and broth that I think we'll probably mention that in a minute here, but having broth-based meals might be really beneficial, and also because of the sodium in there too. The water loss and the electrolyte loss that you guys are going to go through there is really important. That's why we're just saying a little bit of fruit. The broth-based stuff, or a lot of Asian foods have more sodium in them. Also, like the ginger that you'll get with sushi, all that kind of stuff will help rehydrate your body with electrolytes, and also so you're not getting hopefully too inflamed. Just be mindful about some of the choices that you're making when you eat out. Have a good time, but just be mindful that when you're going to go back, if you guys have a weekend off or whatever, just be mindful of what you put in your body today is going to impact your performance tomorrow. It can also impact your sleep. Sometimes when you have some of that high carbohydrate food or something like that at night, it's really hard to fall asleep. Your body, carbohydrates and sugar cause an inflammation process in your body. That's why your blood sugar goes up. It recognizes, hey, there's some inflammation here, or blood sugar goes up. Just like with stress by itself. You don't necessarily need food for your blood sugar to go up. Your body's responding to stress. That's what carbohydrates do. Your body responds to stress. So if you eat a lot of that stuff at night, your body is having to process a lot harder at night than it should be. So if you want some of those higher carbohydrate meals, have that maybe during lunchtime if you can, and then in the evening, that's when you maybe focus on less processed foods. Maybe focus on more of the vegetables and meat and fruit, not so much the starchy stuff, right? So
That's kind of where you. Oh, go ahead.
just be mindful of that on the weekends when you guys do have those days off. You should be hungry and you should be looking for stuff that tastes good too, but just be mindful not to do it maybe at nighttime before bed.
That's where you kind of hear the terminology in part, like you hear about nutrient timing. So it's like I load up my carbohydrates. We'll call it like I have my slice of toast, my sourdough toast, or my sprouted muffin in the morning, and then this afternoon I had like my vegetables and maybe some beans and maybe minimal wild rice, and then in the dinner time it's more heavy. I do vegetables and more lean meats. So for me, that's what works for me. And so I'm not saying that's what you should do, but it's just recognizing, especially in those high stress environments, you may not tolerate that high saturated fat, high carbohydrate for bed. It might keep you awake or give you GI distress. But that's what you guys are saying today. You might go get some pho or whatever it is. While you're here, we're saying experience some of it and see how you tolerate it. Or when you go home, when you get back in your training routine, have some of these foods and see how you tolerate it. Don't wait until you get to selection when stress is already high. You may not tolerate it. And so that now is the time to look at it.
You guys are really good at taking notes in here for your training. You might want to, when you go home and you're doing your training, if you eat something and you're like, I really don't feel right from this, or I'm really gassy, I'm really bloaty, or like I'm burping a lot, or like I'm farting a ton, or this just doesn't feel right. Keep in mind what you just ate, because what you're eating is certainly going to correlate to how you feel, and your body's telling you something. So sometimes if you have like way too many green vegetables at one time, like dark green vegetables, it can cause some of that reaction too, which is not comfortable. So when you go home and you guys are doing your training at home and you're eating, just kind of take note. Like, I felt really good today. These are the things I had today. Or oof, I had a really heavy meal. I was out with my friends. I woke up. You guys have all probably had the experience where your hands kind of feel tight or something like that after eating a lot of sodium. You're like, geez, I can feel like inflammation in my fingers. Or it kind of feels weird, right? You kind of feel like you're retaining water. Those are the things I'm saying. Keep in mind about like what you're putting in your body is certainly going to have a reaction, and systemically. So
next thing, kind of isn't getting order. We're kind of going back and forth and thinking that's great. So like one of the things for, like I mentioned, frozen berries. So we're talking like cherries, blackberries, blueberries. The dark berries are very rich in antioxidants, so they're very protective of the cells, that sort of thing, right? It tends to be lower glycemic. And then again, things like fresh berries are awesome, but you really get a really good benefit. We'll add frozen berries to yogurt, add frozen berries to maybe a grain-free granola or something like that, right? And add milk or coconut milk. There's a lot of options, and that's where over the time when you guys are training here, it becomes a conversation. It's like, hey, like I tried this last night, it felt awesome. Put a pin in it, just like she's saying, like just take note of that, right? Or it didn't feel great. Also, like she had mentioned, eating a lot of healthy greens, right? Good idea, but having like too much kale could give you too much. So it's trying to find a balance. It's not just always eating the same thing. It's finding a good variety. Even seasonal stuff is a good idea, and that's kind of a different conversation where you don't have to get too crazy about it, but like eating watermelon in the northern states in December, it didn't get grown there probably, so maybe shift it to something else, right? And that's where you see seasonal eating. But here I have like one of the things that turmeric, right, curcumin, right, is like Mariva and those sort of things. Fish oil, having those things, cayenne pepper, not just all peppers, but cayenne pepper specifically has a very good oxidative process for you, right? It's very vasodilating. But again, if you don't tolerate cayenne, it's not something you want to be like full in on, okay? And same with turmeric. It's kind of bitter, but for me, it's, you can go into health food stores and a lot of groceries where you can get the little cayenne ginger shots. And it's like, yeah, they're a little bit pricey. Are they super, super efficient? And that's where we've gotten to the point of starting making our own. But in the selection course, like you guys are at, you going in there and buy a pack of 4 of those and just consuming that pack of 4 over the weekend while you're eating better food, or even you're at the cafeteria, galley, DFAC, whatever it is, and you have your meal and you have a nice shot and a little cayenne, or having your snacks of fruit and things after it to supplement your meals, right? And that's the idea is what we're looking at is when you get to a place where you can cook your own meals, great. But a lot of this is like, this is my experience at Bud's. The food wasn't bad. And that was my experience across the military for these high selection. They know food is important. It's like, what was it Patton said, you can put a man through hell if you give him a hot meal. And that's super true. So like, that's what it is like when I went to Bud's, was it the highest quality? No, it wasn't the highest quality food ever, but the turnover was really good. It wasn't sitting in a steam table for hours and hours on end. And the staff at Bud's, and I'm sure it's like that in the Air Force and other places too, the staff, the people that worked there were lovely. They're awesome. They knew who they were cooking for, and they knew how fast you had to go. So they typically were very, very accommodating of your guys' needs. And like, you don't see that when you leave so much for your big Navy galleys, but you do see it at selection, is that accommodation for what you're doing. Another thing to add to that is potentially at night, because you can't have your Recovery Pro at night, or you can't have your magnesium bisglycinate at night, but what you can have is tart cherry juice. Tart cherry juice, no sugar added. You don't want to add any tart cherry. You want it tart. You don't want it super sweet. You want it kind of bitter, right? Because that's how you know that it is what it's supposed to be, right? Dilute it in water. Add some lemon juice to it. Add a dash of honey to it, right? Boom. There we go. Now we've got a little bit sweeter, something like that. I believe that there's I forget the company, the Cherry Bundy. I think there's a pink cap one that has additional whey protein added to it. I think there's a couple different brands. I think it's Cherry Bundy is the brand, and there's like 4 different cap colors. They have one that sugar is added. They have one that's not. They have one that I think there's whey added to. There used to be. And that's what you're looking for, is no sugar added, no added sugar on the back of the label, or it's even say on the front, okay? From like a fat and oil standpoint, it's probably not super reasonable to have avocados until you're making your own food. Maybe buy a couple avocados a week and you just eat them, great. But a good source of fat, essentially, that you can add to you can supplement your diet is coconut oil, right? I think it tastes great. That's what MCT oil is. Like the stuff we've been giving, that's coconut oil. That's coconut. That's what it is. Medium chain triglycerides is MCT. It's coconut oil. Okay, you can get it in powdered form from Bubs, right? But if you can't have the Bubs, what can you have? Just buy the raw coconut oil and just take a spoonful and eat it. Very protective of the brain, very protective of the joints, very protective of the respiratory system, right? It's very, very antibiotic, antimicrobial, right? Those sort of things. So I do yourself a favor and look up all the benefits of coconut oil and how it can be used. You're gonna be like, holy crap, there's so many uses for it. That's why I think in India they call it miracle milk or miracle something. It's like widely used and same with turmeric, okay, in cooking.
Even for your skin, I would say too, like when you guys are going to be getting in and out of the water, if you just get we have a tub of coconut oil, but it's really good for your skin too. So if you guys are getting in and out of the water, you're getting kind of scraped up, that's a really, really good way to heal quickly with that.
That's what I use for lotion. I use it for lotion, for conditioner, for mouthwash. That's what I use. Okay, and you're like, really? Like, yes. Like if you start looking at its use, they're abundant, but then it may not be for you. And like your room inspection, you have a big tub of coconut oil. That'd be like, it's food. It's not a supplement. And so, there's a time and a place to have that stuff around. Maybe not your first. A lot of people don't want to get all this stuff until they got used to the system. They got used to the instructors and. Right, have your cupboard full of bone broth and coconut oil before you're like, you've made it, right? So my favorite peanut butter, and there's a lot out there of peanut butters, for me, the only ingredients in peanut butter should be peanuts and maybe salt, okay? My favorite peanut butter is Crazy Richard's. And the reason why that is because I've looked it up, I've researched, and I've looked to see that that particular peanut butter is not gonna have any pesticides in it.
A lot of grocery stores have their own too. That just look at the back of it though. Like Sprouts probably has their own brand of peanut butter. Wegmans has their own brand. On the back of it, just make sure it has, it'll say peanuts, and that's it, or peanut and peanut oil, because it's peanut oil. So don't get anything that has like palm oil in it. There's a lot of peanut butters that have a few different like things in it. It should be just peanuts.
And not even peanut oil. Like, yeah, so there's
Oils.
naturally peanut oil in there, but it shouldn't be an added ingredient. If it says peanut oil in it, it's either been added
I meant
or
the way it looks.
no, it will. It'll separate, but that's the peanuts. And so if it says peanut oil on it, it's been added, or they're using peanut oil as a lubricant for the machines. So yeah, of course it separates. You go, there's peanut oil. You look around and goes, it's not listed peanut oil. Of course not. But if it has peanut oil on it, it means it's been added. So keep that in mind. Okay, and they use peanut oil as machine lubricant. So just keep that in mind. All right. Powdered milk, because you can't have whey protein. This right here is freeze-dried raw whole milk. So you can, I'm going to go on the raw side, but even if you don't have the raw side, you can go to basically any grocery store where the baking goods is, where you buy the box of Jell-O or the fluffy marshmallow stuff or the whatever it is, the pudding mix. Usually at the very bottom, you're going to see multiple different choices of powdered milk. There's your whey protein, essentially. If you really want to, you're like, well, even to the point where I tell guys, like, right next to it, you're going to have like the Nestle's Quick or you can get real cocoa. Take the powdered milk, add a little bit of cocoa and a little bit of honey, shake it up. There's your protein shake. Like it's just build your own. So now this becomes an option potentially, like when you have your own sink and be a good roommate, don't have powdered milk and honey all over. But these are just all options that often people just they're not aware of it. Okay. The next thing is like the one that I would say is probably, if going through these lists, is probably most available, and probably I would say if I was going to recommend some of these, like do this one if you're going to do any of these, I would say drink bone broth, because that's your collagen. It's super bioavailable, and it's worth getting the best source. Kettle on Fire. There's all sorts of grass-fed, grass-finished bone broths you can get, especially you go to a higher-end grocery store or in California or everywhere. But for skin health, getting in and out of that water, chlorine or otherwise, the irritations, especially like the chafing that you're going to encounter, tendon, ligament, cartilage, cognition, stomach health, all those things where you're high stress, not just on the inside, but high stress on the outside. Bone broth is probably, and you go to keep it simple, like, you can drop some fresh veggies in it, some onions, some carrots. Like you can.
I just drink it straight out of the carton, honestly. Like almost every single day when I get home from here, they make like the smaller cartons or like the bigger ones. I will seriously just cut the thing and drink it. There's really no calories in it, but it has 19 grams of protein in that.
Straight healing.
How much do you think I should drink as selection?
Just do it serving at a time. That's what I'm saying. Dose yourself appropriate. It's not something that, again, if you're in a very high stress environment and you chug that sucker, there's a likely possibility that it could give you GI distress. So in this environment here, find where you tolerate. When you go home, find how to tolerate it. But
the Bubs, I think, is 18 grams a serving. I think the Thorn is 20 grams a serving. The small container that I'm talking about is 19 grams of protein. So you guys, it would be really hard for you to overconsume protein. So during whatever meals, you can have that as a snack in between. And also sometimes there is a little bit of sodium in there too. So again, to refuel some of the electrolyte that gets lost, I would say certainly after a hard workout, if you can get your hands on it, you can include it on top of whatever meal you're about to have, or if you don't have an appetite, that's a really, really smart go-to to drink bone broth, because there's nothing really in it. It's just like flavored water, and collagen basically. So.
And when I say bioavailable, when you drink that, your body is not going to urinate any of it out. It's going to use every bit of its nutrients, every bit of its healing power, and that's where food has such an advantage over some supplements too, right? Like the bioavailability of supplements, you want it to be very high, but there's no guarantee. But if that food source is extremely high, you know that your body's going to use it all, absorb it all, benefit from it all.
That's something I would try here, Joe. Like, so next week you guys are gonna have, you'll have running, you're gonna have swimming, and you're gonna have a workout. So just grab one, grab a couple of them, and just see how you feel. Just take it in between some of those workouts, on top of whatever you plan to eat, and just see if it makes a difference for you. I absolutely think it makes a difference.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. That's why I'm like, this is the one that's like worth trying for, even as a food source. Okay. This one's just not really much of a discussion. Like, there's no place for alcohol in selection. That's not even like well, what about, like, listen, because of the nature of what you're going through, if you can't abstain from a little bit of alcohol consumption while you're going through that, to me it's just someone that's just not super sincere and serious about it. We've got enough alcoholics in our society, military, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's not a slight, it's just the truth. And I think that's the behavior of it alone is the issue. It's not alcohol does exactly what it's supposed to do, right? It's the behavior behind it that's the problem. So creating habits outside of that is a good idea. Okay, now, I'm not saying like, hey, you just graduated Budge or selection, go have a beer with the boys. You bet, man. Like, I'm not, I didn't take part in that, but I'm not ignorant enough to know that there's not value in breaking bread and having a beer with your boys. Like, I'm not that stupid. So, but like I said, we don't want to take the frat party life we had in college and continue it on to the military. Plenty of people are doing that already in the military. We don't need any more of that shit. Okay? Bouncing around here a little bit. And I think that, like we're looking at is, when you get an opportunity, when you can have supplements, some of those things in travel, some of the single serve stuff we talked about with Bubs. That's why when we travel, we use a lot of Bub stuff because of its single serve nature. But when you guys are locked into the base and things like that, you won't necessarily have it available to you, and that's why this comes around. One of the things I really would suggest doing when you get an opportunity to do that is getting a kettle, getting like just a hot water kettle in your room whenever you can in selection, because one of the best ways to introduce some of you can heat things up in it, but specifically, like, I think it's a really good thing is to get a taste for like ginger and turmeric teas, like, and maybe adding a little bit of honey to that, right? Some natural honey. But for me, that's also one of those things that before I go to bed, it's not bad to hydrate with those teas. It's not, getting a really good ginger and turmeric tea is going to aid in inflammation management, not just across it's systemically for your joints, for your stomach, for all that sort of stuff. So find a ginger tea, a ginger turmeric lemon tea, something that you like. Because then again, if you like it, you're more likely to consume it. If you're more likely to consume it, you're more likely to benefit from it. And so I think that's also, we do that all the time as we drink teas all the time, various number ones, and not just the same one all the time. We have 5 or 6 that we like, or you find a place that makes specialty teas.
Also, if you do get some of the, sometimes like just stress alone can cause some of the GI distress, or you just if your body's like, what the fuck are we doing here? This is kind of crazy, and it starts giving you kind of weird responses with your gut. If you drink something hot, sometimes it can kind of bring down that response a little bit. It's really soothing to your gut to drink something warm. So on top of having ginger or a turmeric or something like that, having something heated up is really beneficial for your gut when you're feeling stressed out.
This one's we kind of talked about it, but I just want to focus on your breakfast meal. Like, if you are skipping breakfast, that is a habit I would really start to try to change. And again, don't mean that like I gotta get up and I'm change my breakfast and all of a sudden I'm gonna eat tons of eggs. No, like, or whatever it might be, is the habits you create before you go in. That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're not a breakfast eater right now, start slow. Maybe you start with a banana or two or something, like a banana and like a slice of bread and peanut butter, whatever it might be, 1 egg. But make sure we try to build up to when you get to selection and you're getting up at 4 a.m., 4:35 a.m., and you're, as a group, running off to the cafeteria, galley, or DFAC, that you're not going, I haven't created the appetite yet for eating breakfast.
That's another place to start with something warm in the morning, is just to kind of get your body, you're not starting off with this crazy stress, is having something warm in the morning. There's a lot of companies now that make mushroom teas and things like that for cognition, which is another really, really important way to start your day. If you're not a big coffee drinker, but there's a ton of them that taste really good, that have mushrooms in them. Specifically, lion's mane is really, really good for your nervous system. There's a few other ones that are good for cognition, but lion's mane mushrooms, I would say, is probably one of the most beneficial things that you can have in the morning to start your day for cognition. And especially when you're kind of run down, lion's mane will be probably at the top of my list.
And they may have to wait just a minute when you get into through selection before you add those lion manes, because they'll be perceived as a supplement probably.
I meant like in a tea.
Right, yeah, in a tea for sure, yeah. So that food source is, would probably be acceptable. But
If you guys go to the grocery store like this, whenever you guys go next, go look through the tea section or in the coffee section, and you might see some of that stuff that has lion's mane in it. There's some of it might be in there, but I do know that I think that Bub's also, I think their instant coffee, it comes in little sticks. I think theirs has some of that in there, but
Yep.
I would take a look and just see what you guys can find when you're here and try some of these things out. I know I gave you some of the tea already, but try some of these things out too when you guys are here.
I don't mention coffee much just because I don't drink it. If I could choose to like something to utilize as benefit, it would be. I just don't like the taste of it. I know that if that's probably one of the best best caffeine sources to probably consume on a regular basis, especially in selection. I don't think that's a bad problem at all. I know in Hell Week they won't let you guys have coffee just because of various reasons and this, that, and the other, but I think that coffee is a really good option as long as you're not putting it full of a bunch of canola oil nonsense creamer. Like adding good honey to it, adding a good milk-based creamer or coconut oil.
The MCT.
MCT. Like, so
Are you guys all coffee drinkers?
if you're a coffee drinker,
No,
I
not
think
yet.
it's a great idea. Like for caffeine and it kind of, I think that she's right. I think coffee is a good way to really stimulate appetite even early. And so you make a brew of coffee, run off to cafeteria, defrock, whatever else it might be, or start that process. I think it's a great idea. But I think that starting small, like I said, maybe make sure you stomach some hard-boiled eggs, maybe stomach some bananas and things like that are always really good idea. We're kind of winding down here. We're going to talk, this is kind of dual hat sort of situation because she already talked about chafing, or we're talking about chafing. Again, to reiterate, coconut oil is worth kind of looking at for some of that chafing and things like that. But all because it kind of wears two hats, you know what I mean? So, okay. And then again, some of the things it also is very useful and can be kind of used as food too is beef tallow. A really good beef tallow source kind of wears a couple different hats as well. And finding a good beef tallow source is difficult depending on where you're at unless you order it. But in California, you can track all this stuff down super easy.